Louis Armstrong, Babe Ruth, Francis McDormand, Edgar Allan Poe, Leo Tolstoy, President Andrew Jackson. You may be surprised to learn that they were all orphans. I was watching the news a couple nights ago. They were showing pictures of the people killed in that Texas mall shooting. Then, at the end, they showed a young family of 4 and announced that the mom and dad were murdered along with their 3-year-old son. The face of the last family member standing was so young and so innocent, just 6 years old. All of a sudden, that little guy was an orphan. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. Technically speaking, I guess you could call me and many of us here this morning orphaned adults. Both of my parents have died, but normally we reserve that title for someone younger, someone more vulnerable. Although it's not a huge problem in North America, parentless children are growing in number across the world. In Africa, for instance, primarily because of the scourge of AIDS, 12% of the total number of children are orphans. And in some countries, that number is edging up to nearly 20%. 20%. What happens to a society when 1 out of every 5 kids has to fend for themselves? We know what happened in Russia, what happens still. According to reports, 650,000 children are housed in orphanages in Russia. And then they're released at age 16. 40% of those kids released become homeless. 30% become criminals or commit suicide. That's not quite the exciting narrative and quirky fate of Harry Potter and Little Orphan Annie, is it? Think about that just for a moment, if you would. Can you even imagine the day-to-day struggle? Can you even imagine the fear and the helplessness? Can you imagine what it might be like to not know where your next meal may come from or where you may lay your head that night? What it's like to be without someone to rock you to sleep or to soothe your panic or calm your dread. We take so much for granted, don't we? Something as basic, someone to reassure us, to ease our pain, to help us make it through the nightmare. At any age, for all of us, it's still hard to be without our parents, without that consoling presence when we need it. And when I ask college students what their biggest fear is at this point in their lives, most say it's the death of their mom. Their biggest fear, as they report it to me, is the death of their mom. And I think that says it all. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. This is the promise of Jesus in the gospel this morning. On the night before he dies, he promises that to his disciples. I'm not crazy about the King James Version translation of the scriptures, but in this case, I give it to you because I think it can help us more fully understand what Jesus really wants for us and wants to say to us. That same line is translated, I will not leave you comfortless. I will not leave you comfortless. Christ reminds us that we are not left on our lonesome. We are not simply to fend for ourselves. He promises us his Spirit, the Comforter, the power of God that lets us know in no uncertain terms that we are not alone. We are not abandoned. We are not without help, without aid, without comfort. Comfort will always be there for us. Comfort will always be there for us if we just open our eyes to see it as it happens. Without that blessed assurance, without our faith, we can feel so adrift, so aimless, so purposeless, directionless. Without our faith, without the promise of the Spirit, we are truly orphans, comfortless. And just like in an orphan-plagued society, when we feel abandoned, alone, and forgotten, all sorts of bad and ugly things can begin to happen. So how do we, kids and adults, how do we encounter this Spirit? How do we feel the comfort of God? How do we know Christ did not leave us orphans? How does he, that little guy who lost his whole family in an instant, how does he not feel left without what he needs the most? It's Mother's Day. Our hearts turn to our moms, if we are not moms. And if we are moms, they turn most likely to our kids today, young and old. Too many of us have moms who could not do that for us in one way or another. And for those kids, perhaps even though she was around in the house, they might be more like virtual orphans in some ways. Even likely that it's not her fault, really, because perhaps she herself was a virtual orphan. But it still makes it hard for those kids to get into a day like this, and we nod to them. We understand. But most of us are moms, real moms, who left their mark on us forever. And what I want you to know today, in the light of this gospel, what I want you to know is that it takes a whole world to even try to nurture us and comfort us as only you can. One of the most beautiful ways our God steps in when our dads or moms cannot is through community like this. Through community, through parish church communities. There are thousands, there's perhaps hundreds of thousands of stories of hope, of love, of goodness, of support that I could tell you of because I saw it with my own eyes over all the years of my life as a priest in the church. I've seen it happen again and again. Hundreds of thousands of stories. I could tell you of beautiful moms in the community who foster parented and adopted children who were orphans, even in their older age, who said, how could I not do this? How could I not do this if I'm here Sunday after Sunday hearing what I heard and not step in and do this for these kids, these young people? When my mom died back in 1987, I was 37 years old. It was the Church of Our Lady of Sorrows in South St. Louis. And the community, the parish community, and my family and my friends, my brother priests, and untold others who were instruments of that Spirit of Jesus, bringing comfort, bringing encouragement, and gladdening my heart. At times, we focus on the bad things so much that we miss the overpowering goodness that's all around us all the time. All those moms, God makes sure are there for us. Nobody can take your place in our lives, moms. Nobody can take your place in our lives. Even us older kids of yours. For us, it's also true. It takes a whole community of folks who can even hope to fill that hole in our lives. But Phil, they can. As I watched that 5-year-old face aware that he had just lost his mom and his whole family, my hope in God rests in community stepping up to mother him now, stepping up to nurture him and comfort him as only a mom can. I'm not saying that we should ignore the reality of this loss, not at all. But I do agree with J.R. Tolkien when he wrote in The Lord of the Rings, and I quote, "The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places. But still, there is much that is fair, and though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it grows perhaps the greater." I have seen that to be true. I discovered this hope primarily in my prayer, which reminds me day in and day out that death and sadness and darkness, and certainly not this insidious virus, do not have the final say. We, you and I, when it's our turn, if it hasn't already, we discover the comfort of Jesus' Spirit in unlikely and surprising ways. This still happens. Students will oftentimes tell me, especially this time of the year when we review these years for them, or even just 1 year, students will talk about how one little thing some campus minister did or said made an enormous impact on their lives. I'm continually amazed how something, often an offhanded comment, means the world to someone, bringing them comfort, bringing them joy. All those orphans I mentioned at the beginning of this homily had someone or someones in their lives who made that kind of an impact. For Babe Ruth, it was a religious brother. For Frances McDormand, it was a minister and his wife who adopted her. For Louis Armstrong, it's a Lithuanian Jewish family who took him in. You see, my friends, God makes good on her promises to make sure we are not in the end orphans. Who are the orphans in your sphere of influence? Who are those people who need a good word of comfort today? To whom will you give the gift of the Holy Spirit, the Comforter? And moms, should something happen to you, you can trust the one who said of your kids, "I will not leave them comfortless. I will not." And we want you to know it might take a whole world to fill that space, but someone can, and someone will. That's the promise. That's how much you matter to them and to us, even to us, even in our 70s, adult children now.